The night was warm in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of night where streetlights painted everything in gold and cars hummed in endless rhythm. It was past midnight, yet the sidewalks still carried fragments of laughter, hurried footsteps, and the clink of glasses from rooftop bars. A soft wind swept through, carrying with it the distant scent of fresh bread from a late-night bakery, mingling with a faint tang of gasoline. Somewhere above, a jet passed overhead, its red tail light blinking against the dark canvas of the sky. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the back seat of a modest black SUV. His window slightly cracked open. The world outside felt alive, pulsing with stories that he would never know. His eyes wandered over the city as though he was searching for something in its glittering sprawl. He had just finished a long day on set. 12 hours of filming under hot lights, repeating scenes until every detail felt perfect. His shoulders ached, but there was a softness in his heart, a quiet satisfaction that only came after giving everything to his craft. The driver, an older man named Miguel, hummed softly to himself, a tune that sounded like something from another time. Miguel had driven countless actors over the years, but Keanu was different. There was no air of arrogance, no wall of distance. When Keanu entered his car, he greeted him by name, asked about his family, and listened with genuine care. That kind of humility stayed with a man like Miguel. As they slowed at a red light, the city seemed to hold its breath. To the left, a crowd was gathering outside a trendy new club. Flashes of camera lights popped like distant fireworks. Paparazzi lined the curb, lenses pointed, fingers poised on shutters. Miguel sighed softly, glancing in the mirror. "Looks like they found you again, Mr. Reeves," he said with a hint of apology. Keanu only smiled faintly. He was used to this, the silent chase that never really ended. He never lashed out at them. He understood, perhaps more than anyone, that everyone was trying to make a living. Yet there were nights when the flashing lights felt like needles, pricking through the thin veil of his private world. As the light turned green, the SUV rolled forward. One paparazzo in particular, a young man with a weather-beaten camera slung around his neck, darted through the crowd. His name was Louis, though no one there knew it. He had been waiting for hours, hoping to catch something, anything that would sell enough photos to pay his overdue rent. His sneakers were worn thin, his jacket fraying at the sleeves. Hunger gnawed at him, but desperation kept him sharp. The SUV slowed again near a quiet intersection. Miguel lowered his speed, scanning the surroundings. Louis spotted the vehicle and surged forward, weaving through traffic like a shadow. His camera was already up, lens cap off, fingers ready. He was moving fast, too fast. His focus locked on the dim outline of Keanu's profile through the tinted glass. In that moment, the city seemed to tilt. The uneven pavement caught the edge of Louis's shoe. There was a sharp, sudden snap of sound, a shoe sole scraping against asphalt, and then gravity pulled him down. His camera swung wildly on its strap, and his knees struck the curb with a sickening thud. The world blurred, light and shadow spinning, and a cry escaped him before he could swallow it back. The other paparazzi hesitated, their own cameras still aimed but their bodies frozen. It was rare to see one of their own fall like that. A couple of them exchanged awkward glances but did not move. Louis gasped, trying to push himself up, but pain shot through his leg, white-hot and merciless. His camera dangled from his neck, lens cracked against the pavement. His only means of earning now broken. Inside the SUV, Keanu's sharp eyes caught the movement instantly. He did not see a camera. He did not see an intrusion on his privacy. He saw a human being sprawled on the sidewalk, clutching his knee, breathing in ragged gasps. "Stop," Keanu said softly but firmly. Miguel's foot hit the brake, and the car eased to the curb. Before anyone could react, Keanu opened the door and stepped out into the night. A rush of cool air swept over him. The paparazzi gasped in unison, shutters clicking in confusion. This was not how the game was supposed to go. The star never came to them. The star never stepped into their chaos. Keanu's boots struck the pavement as he moved quickly toward Lewis. The young man's face was pale. His jaw clenched tight against the pain. He looked up, expecting anger, expecting security guards or harsh words. But what he saw instead made his breath catch. Keanu knelt beside him, ignoring the flashing lights, ignoring the murmurs rising from the crowd. His hand rested gently on Lewis's shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady like a calm tide against jagged rocks. Lewis stammered, words tumbling out brokenly. I'm sorry. I was trying to." "Easy." Keanu interrupted softly, his eyes kind. "Do not move. Let us see what we are dealing with." The world around them blurred into background noise. The clicking cameras, the car horns, the curious whispers of late-night pedestrians. In that circle of light, it was only Keanu and the man on the ground. Miguel was already out of the car, pulling his phone to call for help. Keanu gently helped Lewis sit upright, assessing the leg, watching the young man's face for signs of deeper injury. "You are going to be okay," Keanu said quietly, almost like a promise. "We are going to get you checked out." Lewis's eyes brimmed with something that was not just pain. It was disbelief, gratitude, a raw, aching emotion that twisted in his chest. No one had ever stopped for him before. Not when he fell from his bike as a kid. Not when he lost his first job and wandered home in tears. But now, here was Keanu Reeves, kneeling in the middle of the street, holding him steady as though he mattered. The paparazzi did not know what to do. Some lowered their cameras, suddenly ashamed. Others kept shooting, unable to look away. They were witnessing something rare, something real. Keanu stayed with Lewis until Miguel returned with a first aid kit from the car. Together, they cleaned a small cut on his palm, checked his knee for swelling. When the ambulance arrived minutes later, Keanu helped the paramedics lift Lewis carefully onto the stretcher. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, Lewis reached out, his voice trembling. "Thank you. I did not. I never thought." Keanu simply smiled, a small, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Take care of yourself," he said. "That is more important than any picture." The door of the ambulance closed, and the siren wailed softly as it pulled away into the night. Keanu watched until the red lights faded, then turned back to Miguel, who was waiting quietly. The actor exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the world settle in his chest. Not heavy, but grounding, reminding him of what truly mattered. Around him, the city moved on, unaware of the small miracle that had just unfolded. But for those who saw it, those who carried cameras and stories and dreams, it was a moment they would never forget. And in the stillness of that night, as Keanu returned to the SUV, a quiet truth echoed through the streets. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness leave the greatest mark. The ambulance lights disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a strange hush on the street. The other photographers stood scattered on the sidewalk, cameras still hanging around their necks, but none of them moved. A few lowered their lenses, uncertain whether to continue their pursuit or simply go home. Keanu slipped back into the SUV, his movements calm, almost meditative. He closed the door gently, as though not to disturb the fragile stillness that had settled over the moment. Miguel looked at him in the rearview mirror. There was admiration in his eyes, but also a quiet question. "You did not have to do that, sir," Miguel said softly as he pulled the vehicle back into traffic. Keanu looked out the window at the blur of neon signs and shadowy alleyways. "Maybe I did," he murmured. His voice carried a certain weariness, but not of regret. More like the weight of having seen so much of the world's indifference, and deciding again and again not to add to it. Miguel said nothing more. He understood. Some things did not need further words. But outside, the world was already whispering. A young woman named Clara, who had been standing outside the cafe across the street, had captured the entire moment on her phone. She was not a paparazzo, not even someone who followed celebrity news. She had just been sipping coffee with a friend, trying to shake off a long workday, when she saw the young man fall and the black SUV screech to a halt. Her instinct was to film, not for likes or views, but because something about the way the tall man knelt down in the chaos had struck her as important. Back in her apartment later that night, Clara replayed the footage again and again. She zoomed in, her eyes widening as she recognized the man in the frame. "No way," she whispered to herself, hand over her mouth. The clip showed Keanu Reeves kneeling beside the injured paparazzo, steadying him, talking to him softly. The way his hand stayed on the young man's shoulder, the way his posture shielded him from the crowd, all of it felt surreal. Her fingers trembled as she uploaded the video to her social media account with a simple caption: "Keanu Reeves just stopped everything to help a paparazzo who fell. I have no words." Within hours, the post began to spread like wildfire. Comments flooded in, thousands of them, each one a small spark in a growing blaze. Of course he did. Keanu is a national treasure. This man has no ego, just heart. Can we make this man president of Earth already? Clara refreshed the page over and over, watching the numbers climb. She did not expect it to go viral, but by dawn, millions had seen it. News outlets reached out. Influencers reposted it with captions like "Humanity Restored." It became more than a video. It became a story, a symbol of quiet decency in a world addicted to spectacle. Meanwhile, in a small hospital room across the city, Louis sat up in bed, a white bandage wrapped around his knee. His camera, cracked but still functioning, rested on the side table. He stared at it blankly, feeling a tangle of emotions that refused to settle. His phone buzzed with messages from fellow photographers. "Dude, was that really Keanu Reeves who helped you? You're all over the news right now. Man, that's insane. Are you okay?" Louis's fingers hovered over the screen. He typed and deleted his responses, unsure what to say. He felt embarrassed, exposed, but also something else. A warmth that gnawed at the edges of his hardened exterior. He had spent years chasing celebrities, running red lights, diving into crowds, all for a picture that would pay his bills. But none of them had ever looked at him the way Keanu did in that moment. Not as a nuisance, not as a vulture, but as a human being in pain. Later that morning, as the sun rose over the city and turned the skyline into molten gold, Keanu Reeves woke in his modest apartment. He lived simply, despite the fortune he could afford. A black coffee brewed on the counter while sunlight pooled on the wooden floor. He sat by the window, scrolling idly through his phone. He rarely paid attention to online chatter, but this morning was different. Miguel had sent him a link with the words, "People are talking about last night." Keanu clicked. The video filled the screen, showing him kneeling in the glow of the streetlights, a circle of flashes around him. He watched himself extend a hand, watched the young man's eyes fill with disbelief. For a moment, he felt uncomfortable, not because of what he did, but because he never did these things for an audience. But as the comments scrolled by, Keanu's eyes softened. Strangers were sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness. A woman wrote about how a stranger once paid for her bus fare when she had no money. A man shared how someone had stopped to help him change a tire on a rainy night. The video had become a mirror, reflecting not just his act, but the acts of countless others rippling outward. Keanu set his phone down and rubbed a hand over his face. He never sought attention. He never wanted a headline. But maybe, just maybe, if his small action reminded even one person to look out for someone else, then it was worth it. Hours later, Clara's video had been picked up by major news stations. An anchor's voice narrated over the clip. In a world often dominated by harsh headlines, a rare act of compassion from actor Keanu Reeves is warming hearts worldwide. The clip played on televisions in diners, in hospital waiting rooms, in crowded subway stations. People paused mid-bite, mid-stride to watch. They shook their heads, smiled to themselves, whispered to friends, "Did you see that? Can you believe that?" And somewhere in that crowd of viewers, Louis's mother sat on the edge of her couch, tears streaming down her face. She had worried about her son, about the dangerous scrapes he got into chasing stories. But seeing him cared for, even by a stranger, even by someone she only knew from movie posters, filled her with a gratitude so deep she could not speak. That afternoon, Louis opened his eyes to find a nurse adjusting his fore. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you know if someone called about me? A man, maybe he." The nurse smiled gently. "A man named Keanu left a message with the front desk. He said to tell you he hopes you're feeling better. He also said to take it slow." Louis stared at her, his throat tight. He turned his head to the window, watching sunlight filter through the blinds, dancing on the linoleum floor. A single tear slipped down his cheek, and for once, he let it fall. Out in the city, life went on. People hurried past one another, eyes on their phones, lost in their own thoughts. But somewhere beneath the noise, a quiet current of goodness flowed, sparked by a man who did not seek the spotlight, but found it anyway, simply by stopping to help someone who had fallen. And so the night became a story, the story became a movement, and the movement became a memory etched into the hearts of millions. That kindness, no matter how small, can turn strangers into witnesses of something extraordinary. The following day, the city seemed to hum with a different kind of energy. What began as a fleeting street moment was now everywhere. On radio talk shows, morning news segments, and social media feeds overflowing with comments and stitched videos. A clip of Keanu Reeves kneeling beside Louis played repeatedly, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. On podcasts, hosts debated why such an act resonated so deeply with people who had never met him. In coffee shops, strangers struck up conversations over the video, sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness. A retired teacher in Chicago posted a heartfelt thread about a student who once saved her from a fall on icy steps. A bus driver in Manila shared how an anonymous passenger gave his umbrella to a soaked stranger. It was as though Keanu's gesture had opened a floodgate, allowing people to remember that the world could be soft, if only for a moment. Keanu himself stayed quiet, letting the tide rise without his hand guiding it. He moved through his day with that same quiet demeanor, signing autographs outside a film studio, offering a gentle nod to fans who whispered his name as he passed. Yet within him, the memory of the young man's frightened eyes remained vivid, and he hoped silently that Louis was healing. Louis, meanwhile, lay in his hospital bed, unable to escape the torrent of messages and calls that came his way. Journalists wanted interviews, agencies offered to repair or replace his broken camera, and countless strangers flooded his inbox with wishes for a speedy recovery. First, he felt unworthy. He was not a hero. He was simply someone who had fallen while chasing a photograph, but as he scrolled through the heartfelt notes, something softened in him. His sister called in tears, saying she had never been prouder of him, not because he had been hurt, but because someone as kind as Keanu Reeves had seen his humanity in a sea of flashing lights. Louis found himself staring at the cracked lens on his nightstand. He thought about how many nights he had spent running after celebrities, forgetting to eat, ignoring his own aches. He thought about the moment Keanu's hand steadied him, and the words replayed in his mind. "Take care of yourself. That's more important than any picture." For the first time in years, Louis wondered if he could do things differently. Tell stories that mattered rather than just chasing them. Across the city, Miguel parked the SUV outside a small diner where Keanu had asked him to stop for breakfast. The driver watched as Keanu stepped out, head down, a simple baseball cap pulled low over his brow. Inside, the diner smelled of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee, the chatter of regulars mingling with the soft notes of a jukebox. Keanu took a seat by the window, unnoticed at first, and ordered quietly. As he stirred sugar into his coffee, his phone vibrated. It was a text from his publicist, full of links and statistics about the viral video. But Keanu barely skimmed it. Instead, he opened the news app and found a small follow-up article about Louis. It included a quote from the young man himself. "I never thought anyone would stop for me, but he did, and I will never forget it." Keanu felt a lump in his throat, an ache that was not sadness but a kind of overwhelming gratitude. He looked out at the street, at the ordinary people rushing to their ordinary lives, and thought maybe this is what matters most. Not the films, not the fame, but the chance to show someone they're not invisible. He smiled faintly to himself, took a sip of his coffee, and let the warmth spread through him like sunlight breaking through a cold morning. 2 days later, the hospital's quiet corridor was interrupted by the soft knock on Louis's door. He looked up from the book he had been trying to read, expecting a nurse with medication or another journalist with questions. Instead, Miguel stepped inside, holding a plain paper bag and wearing that same gentle smile Louis remembered from the street. "Keanu asked me to bring you something," Miguel said simply, setting the bag on the table. Inside were items so ordinary yet so thoughtful they took Louis off guard. A fresh pair of sneakers to replace his torn ones, a set of clean clothes, and a small handwritten note tucked in an envelope. Louis unfolded it carefully, his hands trembling. In neat, deliberate handwriting were words he would never forget. "You are more than the work you chase. Take time to heal. Take time to live. K." The room seemed to blur around him as he read the note over and over, tears stinging his eyes. For years, no one had reminded him that he mattered beyond the photographs he took. Later that evening, while the sun set outside and painted the hospital walls in shades of amber and rose, Louis called his mother. He told her about the shoes, about the note, about the quiet dignity of the man who had given them. She listened in silence, and when he finished, she said softly, "Maybe this is the moment you start again." Louis stared at his reflection in the window, seeing not just the scruffy photographer who ran himself ragged, but a man who had been seen, truly seen, by someone the world adored, yet who treated him as an equal. In that moment, Louis made a quiet promise to himself. He would not let this kindness fade into another headline. He would let it change him. Across the city, Keanu sat alone in his modest apartment, gazing out at the twinkling city lights. His phone buzzed on the table, but he ignored it, choosing instead to lean back and reflect. He thought about how fleeting fame could be, how easily people forgot the headlines of yesterday. But he also thought about the look in Louis's eyes as the ambulance doors closed, the ripple that one simple act of kindness had sent through millions of strangers. A faint smile curved his lips as he whispered to himself, This is why we're here." And in that quiet room, with the hum of the city beyond, Keanu felt a rare peace wash over him, a reminder that even in a world obsessed with noise, a single human gesture could still speak louder than words. Weeks later, Louis walked slowly along the same stretch of pavement where he had fallen that night. His knee was still tender, but he moved with a careful grace, his camera hanging from a new strap, the cracked lens now replaced. The city bustled as always, horns honking, vendors shouting, laughter echoing from street corners. Yet everything felt different to him now. He no longer chased every flashing light or hurried step. Instead, he watched with patient eyes, looking for the small human moments that most people overlooked. He snapped a photo of a child offering his umbrella to an elderly woman, then lowered his camera and smiled. That single act reminded him why he had ever picked up a camera in the first place. Not to hunt, but to preserve, to tell stories that mattered. Far away, in a quiet cafe tucked between two old bookstores, Keanu sat by a window with a notebook open in front of him. He sipped his coffee as the morning sun spilled across the wooden table, sketching thoughts, scenes, and fragments of dialogue for his next project. A waiter recognized him but hesitated to interrupt. Keanu noticed, offered a small smile, and left a generous tip as he departed. Outside, the city moved like a living mural. Hurried footsteps, bicycles weaving through traffic, voices rising and falling like a symphony. Keanu walked down the street unnoticed, hands in his pockets, his mind calm. He never thought of himself as a hero, never cared for headlines, but he carried the knowledge that somewhere out there, a young man was healing not just from a fall, but from years of forgetting his own worth. And so the story lived on. Not in the noise of flashing cameras, but in the quiet ripple of changed hearts. The footage of that night continued to circulate, inspiring strangers to pause and help someone struggling with their bags, to offer a kind word to someone clearly hurting, to remember that fame and fortune mean little compared to the simple act of showing up for another human being. Keanu's instant reaction had become more than a viral clip. It had become a testament that kindness needs no audience. And as the sun set over the city once more, its golden light poured over crowded sidewalks and lonely alleys alike, carrying with it the silent truth that one person's compassion can make the whole world feel just a little bit softer.